You're very welcome to today's episode of Skin Deep by Karina Tolan. I have with me today Mr. David Alpert. David and his wife Tracy co-created the International Institute for Active Aging and created Advanced Nutrition Program, a skin-focused food supplement that has literally changed the lives of many of my clients. David is a passionate diver and marine photographer, and this has fueled his dedication to driving environmental change. And that is exactly why I was so eager to have this conversation with him here today. You know, I heard David once say how the personal care industry contribute greatly to global waste. And instead of like shying away from that, which you would think being in the personal care industry, David wants to shine a bright light on this and has been very active at a government level, campaigning for change within our industry and holding our industry accountable. So David, what I want to know today is, and what I want us to talk about is, when clients purchase from Monica Tolan's, which in turn is purchasing from you because we work with so many of your brands and hope to work with many more, what are they buying into from an environmental perspective? What do they do? How are they helping the planet?
So firstly, hi Karina, and thanks for inviting me to participate in today's podcast. It's an interesting question because I suppose to a degree we really need to look at the background of what's happening in the industry. And then when they're buying into us and our products, how are we differing from that? But the problem is that, you know, we're living in a world where it's fast becoming apparent that we're utilizing resources at a rate that's totally unsustainable. And whilst we have certain industries being called out, things like the oil and gas industry, and the clothing industry and the food industry, the personal care industry seems to have flown totally under the radar. Now, the interesting thing is, you know, it can be quite difficult to live without your heating in your home, running around with no clothes on. It could be a bit awkward, and of course, food. Whilst these industries that are being called out are, you know, vital for life and should be cleaning up their act. And I know many of your clients will say that the products they use of ours are vital for their lives too. And I'm very glad and always very excited to hear that. You could probably continue to live without your cosmetic products. And yet the packaging from the personal care industry is an enormous problem in the world. And just to put that into perspective, the personal care industry, so the cosmetic industry, produces 120 billion units of plastic packaging a year. And whilst we'd like to think that, you know, recycling is something that's all part of our lives and that when we finish utilizing those products, that's where they go, actually research shows that it can be less than 9% of our products get recycled. And in particular, within the industry that we work in, the problem is that most, frankly, of our products just cannot be recycled. And so they're either going, best case, to landfill, or they're being incinerated, or frankly, they're just landing up in the environment. I had the awful experience of, you mentioned my passion for photography. I was at one point on an expedition very close to the North Pole, and you will be absolutely horrified to hear or see or consider the number of plastic units of personal care packaging that I was picking up in this area where we were above the 80th parallel. So, you know, the 90th parallel is the North Pole. There are very, very, very few people that have ever set foot in that part of the world, and yet it was totally littered with plastic packaging. Some of it from personal care, some of it from the drinks industry. But definitely wherever you looked, there was plastic waste, and it was absolutely horrific.
Yeah, you ultimately paying the price. They are ultimately paying the price up there. That's the area of the world that's suffering.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, I mean, you know, we live in our cities, and to a large extent, we kind of shielded from what's going on in the real world because we live in a slightly, or what one might consider a sanitized environment, whereby, you know, the streets are swept and, you know, the place is cleaned up. And so it's only when you step out into the wild and when I go on these expeditions that you actually start to see the level of destruction that's going on in these environments and the level of waste that is just accumulating out there in space. But if one opens one's eyes to it, I was with the family just in Devon over the winter a year or two ago, and the UK regularly holds a competition for the best beach in the UK, and one of the contenders each year, and it's one on occasion or two, is a beach called Woolacombe. It's a beautiful, wild, long stretch of beach, and of course, when you go there in the summer, it's full of people. It gets cleaned up by the council, so you don't see it in its natural state. But because this was the middle of winter, what was absolutely extraordinary was to see the millions and millions and millions of pieces of tiny microplastics that had washed up and were lying all over the sand. So you know when you sprinkle your kids' sort of cupcakes with those hundreds of thousands, those little color, that's what the sand looked like. It was just covered in microplastics. So what happens is that when plastic lands up in the ocean and starts to biodegrade, and this is one of my concerns about people who say that their plastic is biodegradable. What it does is it breaks up into smaller and smaller pieces, and those find their way into the environment. And in some respects, they're actually more harmful than the big pieces. It's easier to collect the big pieces, and the big pieces don't necessarily find their way into the food chain the way the small pieces do. So it's quite unsurprising, actually, that you find that WWF come out with a statistic that says that people in the UK are eating, on average, a credit card of plastic a week in their food because of all these microplastics finding their way into the food chain. So it's we're polluting our environment, and as you correctly just pointed out now, in doing so, we're also polluting ourselves.
Yeah, and again, that kind of fooling people into thinking that they're doing good.
Yeah. So what happens is. I mean, people may think that when they buy their cosmetic product and they put it in their recycling, that something positive is going to happen with it. But the irony of it is, and I can almost say with a large degree of certainty, that cosmetic product is not going to be recycled. A, because it's contaminated with leftover product on the inside, and B, because very often, most often than not, it's made up of a number of different components, and once you've got a mixed material like that, it just makes it totally unsuitable for recycling. It was a big eye-opener for me because we at one point invited a recycling specialist in, and I lined up all my products in front of her to find out, what happens to them when they go for recycling. And what was the eye-opener for me is that so few of them, it was just one or two out of a very large batch, would actually be suitable for recycling. The rest would have to go to either incineration or landfill. And it was at that point that we took the decision to actually buy back our empty packaging. So you spoke about, when people are coming to engage with you, get your excellent advice on skincare and then utilize our products. We offer the service whereby if they return the empty packaging to you, we buy that back and collect that in so that it doesn't go to landfill, doesn't get incinerated.
Yeah, and they can also bring back to their clinics wherever they're purchasing their products from other plastics as well, can't they? Yes.
So we've opened that up to other people's products as well. We don't pay for other people's products, so we don't actually buy those back because I don't know if I can say. Can I say we pay £1 a unit to buy back our own packaging, and but we will collect in other people's. And but I'll tell you an interesting story in terms of, well, then some of your listeners maybe think, well, what happens next? Because it was entirely our intention once we'd bought back, and we've been doing this for a while now, so I can tell you we have hundreds of thousands of units of our own packaging and other people's packaging, which we've collected and aggregated. And the intention was to send this off to a specialist recycling plant that had the ways and means of actually stripping this down, separating off the componentry, and they were going to make these into plastic boards for us, the sorts of boards that look like wood. And we actually found out that a lot of that was greenwashing, unfortunately, and that whilst they might be able to use some of it to produce boards, what happened is that a lot of it was actually still going to landfill and incineration. So we've held on to that, and we've appointed somebody, a young engineer, to look at various other companies that we can work with to find a way of actually repurposing and reutilizing that plastic in a non-single-use plastic way. So we're still investigating what to do with it, because having paid literally, as I say, hundreds of thousands of pounds to get the plastic back in, what we don't want is for that to still end up landfill and incineration. And we're looking at ways on what we could do with that. Now, the problem is that we're a little bit of a lone voice in this space, and I do often speak, in fact, just in next month, I've been invited to speak again at big industry events. I've been asked to speak to business leaders, both in and outside our industry, where I point out and use my photography to try to raise awareness and show them what's happening out there. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of anyone else that is actually doing that and will buy back their packaging and make sure that it doesn't find its way into our ecosystems.
Well, not that anyone needed another reason to purchase Environ skincare, but that is huge, and that is huge work for you. It's taken on a massive workload. Even like you said, it didn't even work out like you had initially planned. So even that's more work.
Yeah.
So is like, what can we do? I know the end user needs to make good decisions, like buying from someone like you, where there's so much integrity and accountability in place. But is that what you would like to see across the board, to see more industries within the personal care to do likewise? Or what do you foresee happening? What can we do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is, whilst we love the fact that people utilize or use Environ and see the benefits of it, and then also the advanced nutrition program, and we can talk about the packaging there because that's a whole different story again. We're not oblivious to the fact that people will also use many other personal care products. Mm-hmm. And I think as consumers, the best thing that they can do is to start putting pressure on the companies that they're buying from, be it their hair care product or any other personal care product, to start doing the same. Either they need to be using refillable bottles, or they need to be taking back and properly disposing of the empty bottles that they are using, or they need to be using non-plastic items. Now, it's very interesting because there is this whole notion of it's an absolute minefield, and one can be tied up in knots endlessly in terms of what can be recycled and what can't be recycled. So we developed our own sort of very crazy idea here in terms of, rather than get tied up in all these knots and try and become specialists on what would be recycled, in Malahide versus, what's being recycled in London, versus what's being recycled in Glasgow, for argument's sake, because every council has its own requirements, is we have something called the drop test. And our drop test is simply, if this empty container were to fall in the ocean or to fall in a forest, what would happen to it? Would it biodegrade, in a relatively short space of time? And would it pollute the environment? And if it wouldn't biodegrade, we buy it back. And if it does, biodegrade, then we're happy to leave it, the empty packaging in the hands of the consumer to dispose of responsibly. And that's probably a better example of that is the advanced nutrition program, because in the days when that product was first invented, we had very eye-catching, very fancy outer packaging. It was all plastic, and when we became aware of the problem, and really wanted to make a substantive difference to our packaging and our environmental footprint. What we did was we switched to cardboard packaging, and you can see that we have a cardboard outer and we have a metal base. And we know that if that was to fall in the ocean, that would pretty quickly melt away to something totally insignificant, and the metal base would just biodegrade. So that's our move for the Advanced Nutrition Program. We've been able to do it because it's not a wet product. It's different to what we're seeing for something like Environ, which is a wet product. But I'm quite proud of what we've achieved so far with the Advanced Nutrition Program. And in actual fact, over this year, you're going to see a whole new set of packaging that will take us eventually away totally from any plastic at all within their range, and make it even easier for people to recycle the products. So whilst we've got more than one material here, where you've got metal and cardboard, we'll be able to move to a single material. And the other thing, so it's a triple win. It's quite exciting, but it just gives you an idea of our mindset and how we're continually looking to push the envelope and improve on things, even though we're already in a good place there. Is that the new packaging we've shown in our stability tests improves the stability of the products even further. So not only are we protecting the products better, because that, of course, is one of the biggest problems when it comes to packaging food in something other than plastic. So it's the stability is improved, and of course the environmental credentials of the packaging will be improved. So that's a trajectory that we're on, and that'll all unfold this year, and we're looking forward to introducing that into the market. I should reassure people it's not in a bad place at the moment, but we can always look to improve. And so I'm quite excited about that. As far as our wet products go, there we are still looking for other solutions. One of the things that we've done is we again, with an engineer, we've designed some new packaging that we're hoping to be able to bring to market within the next year or so, that we'll make available across the industry, that totally revolutionizes how wet product is housed, maintained, and recycled, and it will enormously reduce its footprint, and make it enormously more environmentally friendly.
Wow, fantastic! And then you would hope to see others follow suit.
Yeah,
I mean,
the idea,
real trailblazer
yeah.
in this line, which is fantastic, because once one person does it, then there's no excuse for why everyone can't.
Well, that's our hope. That's our hope, is that we can be leaders in this field and set an example for people. Of course, I mean, it's enormously expensive to do what we've been doing, buying back our packaging. But it's a decision we've taken as a company that's our stance. Yeah. And largely it's been driven, as you said in your introduction, by the fact that, I've been out into the wilds, I've seen how we're polluting the environment, and I actually feel that it is immoral for us to continue simply delivering products, tens of thousands a month, into the market space with absolutely no regard as to what's happened to them once the consumers finish using them. So I'd like others to follow suit. What we are starting to see is governments introducing things like a plastic tax. Ironically, we're still getting charged the plastic tax, even though we're buying back our product, which sort of sits in the throat a little bit. But I think it's a good thing, and hopefully it'll encourage people to move away from single-use plastics to other materials that are biodegradable and that can be infinitely recycled. So if we think about our own industry, we can think to aluminium, to glass, and various other things that actually won't pollute the environment if it lands in the environment, but more importantly, can be easily recycled if it is actually taken back by the person to a recycling facility. So in some cases it may be collected from your home or whatever the case is, but glass and aluminium there is a very positive recycling approach that will take care of those.
Mm-hmm. Within this arena, you're not a big player. You would be quite a small business within this arena, and yet doing huge work at great cost to you. And that is really what I wanted you here today, because I think that is integrity and accountability. And yes, you sleep better at night knowing that you will hopefully leave this planet having had a good influence on it. But that's what I wanted people to know, that you can choose who you're buying from and who you support. And I just feel that ultimately we will all pay the ultimate price if we don't make these right decisions. I seen it. I have 2 daughters, and obviously following their mum, they're big into skincare and personal care, and they're permanently masking in some respect. But I just noticed since Christmas, their Christmas list this year was a lot more personal care on there. But there's so much plastic in the house. I see it with their perfume bottles and their bath foams, etc. And they say, "Mom, can I get this?" And I'm like, "I'm not buying more plastic." And I think as parents, we need to make those decisions. Like, they love nothing better than running into Primark or Pennies in Ireland with €10. And when they're going, I say to them, "Don't come back to me with plastic. I don't care what you buy." But there's just so much cleansing tools that don't even work, aren't effective, potentially could upset the stratum corneum. But as I say to Grace or Emer, who are 14 and 12, this is going to be here long after you, long after your children. This cleansing tool, because you chose today to buy it, is going to be still on this planet. So I think as well we need to make them think differently about the choices. And then us adults also need to think differently and know that, the choice is there. You can seek people like the International Institute for Active Aging out. You can seek those trailblazers out.
Well, there's quite a lot there to unpack. So firstly, well done in terms of taking that approach. I think firstly, one of the things that is generally a trend in the world is we've tended to become hyper consumers. And so there's this tendency to consume more and more and more. And one wonders to what extent there will be a backlash against that, and people will start to revise their buying decisions and actually only consume or purchase what they need, rather than this constant need to go out and buy stuff or to gift stuff to people the whole time, when our lives are so cluttered with stuff that we don't know where to put it anymore. So there's an interesting concept, and that's a whole sort of a sociological debate of which I'm probably not at all qualified to discuss. But it's great that you obviously see, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about that you're talking to your kids about it, because this generation, or they're the next generation that are going to live, unfortunately, with a lot of the consequences of what we've delivered for them. And, there's so many people jumping on the bandwagon at the minute in our industry, pretending to do good in terms of environment. But unfortunately, there's very little substance around a lot of what the others are doing. And this is where I've been campaigning, and in some respects, I'm quite sure I've made myself quite unpopular. But I was, we have every year we have London Fashion Week, and I was invited just before London Fashion Week to have London Beauty Week to speak on a panel, and there were 2 other CEOs on the panel, and they were from a company, but both of them were companies that have over £1 billion euro turnovers, and the curator asking the questions asked them, what is it that people can do in order to make a difference? And the first one answered that, well, we need to use less product, which goes back to the point we were just discussing. And they said, well, if you're going to wash your hair, rinse only once rather than twice. And then they went to the second person and asked the same question, and she agreed and said, that was a good idea. And then they came to me and I said, unfortunately, the level of destruction that we're seeing means that you're going to need to make much more substantive change than just washing your hair once rather than rinsing twice when you wash it. And I was looking out into the sea of bright young faces who were Instagramming and recording the event, and I said, unfortunately, all of you are looking forward to a very bright future, but the future is quite bleak if we continue the way we're going. We're consuming more than the earth can sustain. And we need to properly change and look at the way things are being consumed. And I mentioned the fact that a lot of people sort of jumped on this bandwagon and have sort of been greenwashing it. You and I were discussing early this morning that actually our passion at IIAA, or Tracy and my passion, goes right back to when we were kids. and both of us were at university. Tracy started an organization called Action for Animals, and we were in a difficult political environment, very active in trying to get seal culls banned, trying to get circuses banned, trying to get zoos that had inadequate facilities closed down, and so on and so forth. And to a certain extent, Tracy, who was headed up the organization, was very, very successful. But it goes down to one's belief in terms of, we're here to share the planet with other life, not really to conquer it. And I think, what's really important, just going back to what you said, is that if one can inculcate in one's kids a love and a passion and an understanding, then it's a very, very good start. But what's most important is that actually people do something of substance, and don't just pay lip service to this whole movement to try and improve what it is that we're doing. And just to that point, it does worry me because we have certain certification, as there always is when one wants to try and regulate and clean up an act, and you have these outside NGOs, people like, you have organizations like B Corp, which will certify your company and do an assessment on where you are and where you want to get to, and give you the certification. And for companies out there that are listening to the podcast and have no idea where to go or what to do or how they should address this, perhaps that's fine. But the thing that worries me about some of these certifications is that, and people wear the badge very proudly because it costs them a lot of money to get, is that they look at the whole ESG nature of the company. So they look at the social and governance as well as the environmental. And the problem that we have is that you can earn all your points to become a B Corp certified company, with your social and your governance, and very little happening in the environmental space. And so you give this impression that you are this great environmental company because that's really what sort of B Corps become synonymous with. But in actual fact, there's very little substance behind that. And I suppose, if I have to sum up the last 5 minutes or so what we've been talking about, the important thing is that we look at substantive change, meaningful change. Stop paying lip service to these things, start doing things that can actually make a difference. And we need the young kids and the bigger kids, the older kids like you and I, to go out there and challenge people. I was out in a shop just recently. It's a favorite chocolate supplier of mine and Tracy's. We've got this real passion for dark chocolate. And the thing that struck me is that it's a very, very, very well-known brand, but every single one of their chocolate bars was wrapped in plastic. Now, the interesting thing is there is a very good and viable alternative to plastic for chocolate bars. So I challenged the staff in the shop, and the very well-trained salesperson turned around to me and said, yes, we have an environmental policy, and we plan to be plastic-free by 2030. And I'm thinking, I didn't just think, I exclaimed. I couldn't just stop the words coming out of my mouth. My goodness, it's a long way off for a problem that has an answer today. And so these are the sorts of things which consumers have to hold companies accountable to. That, start changing now, make substantive change, stop paying lip service and say you're on a journey when actually in reality you're doing very little. And hopefully together we can address these concerns.
Yeah. And hit them where it hurts, profits.
Yeah.
Choose better where you're making your purchases from.
Sure.
David, I want to ask you, I'm not going to let you go without asking the CEO of IIAA what your skincare and your ingestible skincare are. Like we'll go with Advanced Nutrition Program first. Tell me what supplements you currently take. Maybe you switch them up like me. I could be at any particular time taking something different, but tell me what you take.
So, okay, it's interesting. I start off the day when I eat breakfast, because I think it's very, very important that you must take your supplements with food, and you must take your supplements with a food, ideally, that contains some fat in it that will help just absorb all the nutrients that you need.
So a lot of the nutrients are fat soluble, which would be why
yes.
would need fats. Okay.
The water-soluble ones are more easily absorbed in any case, but the fat-soluble ones, as you say, helps if you have some fat in your food. So I have mine with a full-fat yogurt in the morning, and I start off with a Pro Vitality, which is, to me, the all-round most fantastic multivitamin, essentially. And then I would have some probiotics, even though I'm having them with yogurt, have some probiotics together with that. And then I would take a vitamin A supplement with that as well. And then in the evening, again, I'll have some probiotics, and I'll also have Almegas, and our Skin Acumax. I'll take 4 Skin Acumax every evening.
How many?
4.
Yes, okay. My daughter is a huge fan. Huge fan. She sees incredible benefits from taking Acumax. So much so that when I'm a celebrity getting me out of here, she wasn't concerned about how she'd be a celebrity on the programme. She was just concerned how she could get her Acumax there.
Right.
David, thank you so much for
Super.
today. I learned loads myself, and I am now going to be taking Pro Vitality. Don't know why, but it goes over my head. But every time I hear someone speak about it, they rave about it. So yeah, that would be my new one. But thank you for your time. Thank you for again being so eager to shed a light on such important topics.
Thank you, Karina. Thanks for inviting me. And as you say, I mean, it is really important to share, to shine a light on this very important topic. And thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.